Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Christie, please call the roll. And
Yeah.
now let's probably do it for both boards, yeah.
All right. Next one.
Here.
I'm just gonna go down the.
Present.
Dave Leggett,
Here.
Tom Chesney,
Here.
Bill Lundquist,
Here.
John Mallon,
Late but present.
Jackie March. Here. Robin,
Here.
thank you.
Okay, we have everybody here. Chief, I think you probably want to make an introduction. We have an amendment at the same time.
Yes, if we can make one addition to the agenda, to adding the swearing in of Rob Wessing, the new acting city manager. Do that.
Okay, so I'll introduce acting city manager Rod. And Rod, you get from over here and raise your right hand. All right. Swear in and make you official. I state your name.
I, Rod Wessling,
Do solemnly swear to faithfully execute
do solemnly swear to faithfully execute
the duties as the director for the Loveland Fire Rescue Authority.
the duties as a director of the Loveland Fire Rescue Authority,
To selflessly serve
to selfishly serve
with commitment, compassion, and courage.
with commitment, compassion, and courage.
I will uphold the mission that incorporates
I will uphold the mission that incorporates
response, readiness, resources, and relations,
response, readiness, resources, and relations,
the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the United States of America,
the state of
the
Colorado,
state of Colorado,
the rules, policies, and procedures of the LFRA.
the rules, policies, and procedures of the LFRA.
Congratulations, you're official. Thank you very much. Thank you. Rod Finney, probably everybody knows it better than know me, but since I'm city manager here for 16 years.
16 years, 16.
Okay, yeah. So welcome aboard. It's
Thank you.
Good to have you here and look forward to working with you.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Jeff.
And we have Vince and Matt both here from the city as well. Vince is a city attorney. And I've known Vince for a long time. How long have you been in the city?
Since 2014, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Matt was a founding father of the city, right? I mean. Anyway, good to have you both here. If I overlooked anybody.
I don't think so.
Okay. Emily, do you know everybody in here? Have you met people from the rural board?
I know most people in the room, but there are a handful from the city council as well as the rural board that I actually know.
Okay, and Emily, the LFRA attorney. And you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, happy to. So my name's Emily Powell, and I am with a law firm out of Denver, Ireland, Stapleton. And I practice exclusively in the space of special districts and emergency services. So I've been doing that since 2009. At this point in my career, 100% of my practice is devoted to representing Colorado fire departments and park and recreation departments. And I love doing it. I've been working with LFRA since 2016. I was actually reflecting on my drive up, I was going up, that when I came into working with LFRA, it was in the context of a different kind of merger. At that time, the city employed all of the firefighters and owned the stations and the apparatus, and we were undertaking to merge all of those assets into LFRA as the employer and the owner. So that was in 2016, and then after that, myself and my partner Dino Ross came in as general counsel, and we represented LFRA ever since. Well, one thing we'll talk about is how common mergers are becoming among fire departments in Colorado. And I have been fortunate to kind of get to be on the leading edge of that. I do a lot of fire department merger work. If you had told me when I was in law school that I would build a practice around merging fire departments, like I would not have even known that that was a thing. But here we are. So this is work that I really, really love doing. I'll toot my own horn a little bit, because I'm pretty good at it at this point. Happy to answer any questions that you have. I've tried, and I'll stand up once I start speaking for real, but I've tried to prepare a presentation in both verbal format, words, and then a visual format as well, because different people absorb information in different ways. If I'm going too fast, not going fast enough, you have questions, you want to stop. I'm the kind of lawyer that keeps talking until somebody stops me. So feel free to raise your hand and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And we have Linda Glesney, who represents the Logan Rural Fire District. Linda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I won't give as much introduction. I've been working with the Logan Rural Fire Protection District for 4 or 5 years now. Greg White, as you all know, was the longstanding representative of this district. At his retirement, I've worked with Greg some in Estes Park. I also represent fire protection districts and other special districts. Our firm is a special district law firm as well. We also have some nonprofit corporate clients, so this is our area of interest and expertise as well. Worked with Greg some, where he was, I think, a very easy person for me to transition with, because we work together and I think we have similar styles, although we're obviously not the same individual, but have enjoyed working with this district. And just getting to know city staff, because it sounds like we're gonna have a lot more of our kind of consolidated conversations with the city going forward. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And on screen, we have Ben, who is the manager for the rural district. Ben, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Of course. Thank you, Board Chair. Hopefully the speakers are still working like they were earlier. My name is Ben Archer-Klaus. I'm one of the owners of James Vincent Group. We actually specialize in providing finance director services to around 30 different fire districts and departments. We have also worked with consolidation studies and then also implementation of consolidations, as well as working under authority models. So we've been with the district for about 6 months, thoroughly enjoyed working with the district and excited to listen into this presentation.
And Ben, what's that accent for everybody?
Alabama.
And there might be a little bit of a Welsh hint there too.
Yeah, more Welsh and English than Alabama, to be honest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take us to public comment. Any public comment, anybody online? Hearing none, take us to our regular agenda. Chief, I'll let you say hello to everybody and introduce the agenda.
All right, well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. If I could just ask everybody that when you are talking to have the mics on. I don't know how well it's coming through for Ben, but for the recording, we want to make sure that we're capturing that. So first and foremost, I want to welcome everybody to Fire Station 10. If you're wondering why we're in Johnstown, this is part of the LFRA. This is part of our 187 square miles. And this is our newest facility. So we're honored to have both boards here and excited. I can say this as the fire chief, this is an incredibly exciting time for me. Now, I haven't been privy to the many conversations that have occurred prior to me getting here. I know this has been a conversation for a number of years, but I think this is the first time we've got to this level of conversation. So it's an exciting time, and it's truly an exciting time from the perspective that Emily said that she'll toot her horn a little bit. I will tell you, just general conversations with fire departments throughout the Front Range. Emily's name comes up on a regular basis. I can tell you things like this are in the air and in the water. It is something that's occurring throughout, not only the Front Range, but Colorado is well known for this type of effort. So we're excited to kind of have this conversation. You know, Brian and Matt are excited to have this conversation too. The sooner they can get us out of the general fund, I think they would appreciate that. I do respect that. We recognize the drain that we do have while providing the service that we do for the community. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to have both boards here and entertain the discussion.
I overlooked probably introducing the rural board members to people from the city staff, and we should probably go around the table, if we could.
Paul Kowski, Bill.
Dave Blaze, Rural District President.
Tom Chesney, Rural District Secretary and Treasurer.
Bill Lundquist, Rural District Director.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Chief, go ahead.
We want to go all the way around it.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully they know, maybe not.
Yeah.
How much city council?
Came in on two wheels. Yeah, right.
Brad, we all went to station one first.
I was hoping. Thank you, Jen.
Call that level one saving.
I turned on the lights in the conference.
All done.
All right, so at this point, we'll turn it over to Emily and go from there. Yes, we got it on this side here.
Fraser.
Fraser, you can either be the slide flipper or I'm happy to hold the mouse and flip the slide myself, either way.
Does everybody have a copy of the presentation?
Okay, I will be the slide player.
Okay. So Chief is correct. Fire departments, there we go. Fire departments all over the state have been merging, and that is a trend that I did my first merger in 2013, so about 10 years ago. Actually 2011, if you want to consider Evans, which we'll talk about a little later on. But it's a trend that I have seen accelerate throughout the 14 years of my practice. The last two mergers that I completed were in 2021. Both of them were finished in 2021. In addition to this conversation that I'm having today, I am in the late stages of completing a merger in El Paso County, the beginning stages of starting the merger in Jefferson County, and talking to two fire departments about whether they want to merge in Adams County. So right now on my plate, I'm having this conversation in 4 different counties in Colorado, including you all. Okay. So why do departments do this? Couple of reasons, a lot of reasons actually, but it mostly comes down to money and service level. Okay. Operating a fire department, well, will come to no surprise to anybody in this room, is really, really expensive. Okay, really expensive. Also, you're weird. You have weird personnel rules, you have weird scheduling, you have weird equipment. You don't fit quite within the way the municipalities do things in other departments. So trying to keep up with those costs, particularly in the municipal context, and trying to both simplify and maintain a level of service can sometimes be enhanced through economies of scale. And you get economies of scale by merging with other departments and growing. So in an authority context, that benefit from the economy of scale is enhanced. Because oftentimes when I am doing mergers, in fact, in all of the other 3 I mentioned, I'm going from 2 fire districts to 1. Okay, so we're taking our levels of government down by half. In an authority context, we're going from 3 to 1. Okay, so you're really enhancing your administrative efficiency by not doing government in triplicate. You only have to do government once. And that means 1 meeting per month, 1 budgeting process, 1 set of accounting books, 1 audit, 1 attorney. So Linda, Vince, and me all have to arm wrestle. You have reduced need for administrative contract drafting and management. And for example, just when I got here today, there's conversations happening around the table about contracts that the rural needs to enter into with the authority and the city and the rural, right? You don't need that anymore. So that becomes more efficient and lowers those costs. This one I want to put a heavy asterisk on in sort of a tongue-in-cheek way. Known revenue stream through property taxes, asterisk, once the legislature gets its act together. Right now, we don't really know what's happening with property taxes, but I do trust that that's going to settle in a couple of years. And property taxes do tend to remain very stable or go up, okay? Barring another 2009, property taxes rarely go down. And so that allows the fire authority to predict year over year, how much revenue is it going to receive, and to be able to build long range and strategic planning around those known amounts. Right now, and for many years, in fact, since I was working with Mark Miller, the authority has struggled, and the city has struggled, and the rural has struggled to know how much money does the fire department need, how much can we afford? And that long-range planning for people and assets has been, I think, difficult for everybody here. And so I kind of switched these, but along with that comes more straightforward financing options. As a unified fire protection district, there is a very clear and straightforward process for getting a bond, for doing a certificate of participation, for doing a tax anticipation note, for doing a lease purchase agreement. Right now, the authority can do many of those things, not all of them, but it doesn't, right? Because it doesn't have its own source of revenue that doesn't come from the city or the rural. So we have to engage 3 partners to be able to do a financing option that would be available to the district fairly simply in a unified structure. So this is the why. And then the next question is the how, okay? And you can switch it, yep. If we were talking about merging 2 fire protection districts, I would have lots of choices for you on how to do that. And when I'm talking to 2 fire protection districts, I talk about it as different routes on the map. Okay, we're going from San Francisco to Atlanta. We can take the northern route, we can take the southern route, we can go straight through the middle of the country. We're going to see different things along the way. We're going to encounter different challenges. At the end of the day, we're always getting to Atlanta. Okay, and so they get to pick. In your case, we don't have so many choices. We really only have the straight down the middle choice because we're talking about a municipality and a fire protection district. And we don't have the same tools available to us when we're merging 2 different types of government. So in my head, because I live in this space, and I'm a crazy person who thinks about this all day long, I understand all the different options sort of intuitively, but they're not intuitive. So I've given them nicknames. Okay, to hopefully make them a little bit easier to absorb, no pun intended. This one is called the amoeba. Okay, the option that's available when we're merging a fire protection district and a municipality, I call the amoeba. And that's because what we are going to be asking the rural district to do is to extend its boundaries. It's here and it's little, and it's going to extend its boundaries and encircle the city and absorb it. Just how an amoeba eats, I think. So that's why I call it the amoeba, okay? Because the rural isn't changing its fundamental structure, but it's getting a lot bigger, and the city's going to get absorbed into that structure. This is a very high level overview of how it works. Okay, this is the one slide, 30,000 foot view of how we get this done. I'm not going to go through this slide point by point because we're going to talk about each point in subsequent slides. So I've got the breakdown coming up next. Before we start the breakdown, are there any questions to this one? Thoughts, comments? Okay.
Are you seeing any of this done with, police departments? Any consolidation?
No, but I'll put 2 caveats on that. One, I don't represent law enforcement, so that's not to say it doesn't happen and I just don't know about it. But the other reason that I may not be aware of it, and I can look to our 2 other attorneys and ask if you are aware of it, is that their fundamental structure is different. There's not like a law enforcement district. You've got municipal law enforcement and you've got sheriff's offices, and they're unlikely to merge. So I'm not aware of it, but I think they just live in different spaces.
And my other question is, with the service areas seeming to increase, is there any kind of a maximum geographic area
Like how
or
big can you get?
size?
There's no legal limit. Fire protection districts can be as big or as small as you want them to be. I mean, there are some that are a couple miles square. There are some that are huge, countywide. And you're not limited to county boundaries either. So you're not limited to municipal boundaries. Commerce City used to have 3 fire departments operating within its boundaries. Now that got tiresome because of fire code enforcement issues, and they fixed it, but it is possible legally. I think it's as big as you want it to be and can sustain. A really interesting example of that is Summit Fire and EMS Authority in Summit County. Summit County used to have 6 or 7 different fire districts, and now they're down to 2. There's Summit Fire and EMS Fire Protection District, which covers all of Summit County other than Breckenridge. Breckenridge is covered by red, white, and blue. Whether they'll merge in the future, I don't know, but that's an example of a jurisdiction. Boulder County, the fire departments of Boulder County have talked for years about merging as well. I don't know if they ever will. But that's another one that's very fractured and they've talked about it.
My next question is, all of the intergovernmental agreements that exist now in either the city or the rural, do they have to be redone or do they automatically flow through to the?
Both and neither. They don't have to be redone, but they don't automatically flow either. And we'll talk about contracts later, but they all have to be assigned in some way. And it's kind of a contract by contract determination of, can we automatically assign this without going to the third party and asking their permission, or does the contract require us to go to them and get permission? The contract, I love contracts. If I hadn't been a lawyer, I would have been a copy editor. So like words and periods and picky decimals, like those are that's my jam. So I love transferring contracts. Everybody else hates it, but we'll help you through the process. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Director Chesney, I thought I'd comment on your first question concerning law enforcement. I do have some experience in that area representing the local police department. I can tell you that is really rare. The only, as far as growth or kind of an amoeba example, to use Ms. Powell's language in the law enforcement context, the only time you'll see that, the most recent example I can think of is Berthoud had its own municipal police department. There were challenges with that police department. It was effectively disbanded, and Larimer County Sheriff's Office overtook law enforcement services there. So that's really one example I can think of where a municipal service was supplanted by a county law enforcement service. But typically it goes the other way, where counties services are generally shrinking and municipal services are expanding as municipalities annex and then provide more municipal services. So that was point one. And point two, I was going to make public comment, not that Ms. Powell needs a character reference, but I've been working with Ms. Powell with Ms. Powell since 2016, and she's one of the finest attorneys I've had the pleasure to work with. So
Thank you.
she's very, very, very talented in this area.
Thank you.
And does payment for that endorsement?
Get you later. Okay, let's talk specifics. I've broken the merger process down into steps, so you can go to the next slide, Fraser. Oh, the amoeba. Okay, actually, this is a really important slide. I forgot my visual. This is what you have now. Okay, this is the structure that exists now. You have a city, you have a rural district. These lines represent your IGA that you've used to form LFRA. Okay, but LFRA doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. And what's interesting, I spoke about this with Chief, I think. If the rural and the city decide that you want to move forward and do this, I am more than happy to help in every way that I can, with process, with drafting, with advice, with consultation with your other fine attorneys. But ultimately, LFRA does not drive this bus. Okay, this is an agreement and a process that occurs between these two partners. And so that's why we wanted to have everybody here and have everybody's attorneys here and all of that. Because LFRA is just a creature of what the rural district and the city have put together. Okay, so we're going to build off of this visual depiction as we go through. So that's what this is meant to represent. This is what you have today. Okay, so step one. Step one does not exist in statute, but it's universally accomplished, and it's really, really, really critical for the smooth functioning of the rest of the process. And this is to draft what I call a pre-inclusion intergovernmental agreement. As I just said, this pre-inclusion intergovernmental agreement is between the city and the rural. LFRA will not sign that document. Okay. And the pre-inclusion agreement is a lot of really important things. For us as the attorneys, one thing it does is it describes step by step how we're going to complete what's called an inclusion and election. Good, I got that right. Let's talk about the words inclusion real fast. When you are a city, you can annex property, right? You guys do that all the time, I'm sure. In theory, you can also de-annex property. You probably do that less often, but it exists in the statutes. Special districts have the same ability to annex and de-annex property, but we don't call it that. Under Title 32, it's called inclusion and exclusion, okay? So and that exists in Part 4 of the Special District Act is the inclusion statutes. We don't need to worry about exclusion for purposes of our project. So if you want to go read Title 32, Part 4 in your spare time with a glass of wine, that's what we would be relying on. So when we talk about the amoeba, when we talk about the rural district putting its boundary arms out, what it's actually doing is including the city, annexing the city and its boundaries. Okay, so I'm going to use that word a lot. And there's a process for that, and the process is set forth in Part 4 of the Special District Act. There is also an election that would have to occur in order for this inclusion to happen. The city voters have to agree that they want this. And the way they indicate their agreement is through an election. And so we're going to follow the elections code as well. So the first thing we're going to do in our pre-inclusion IGA is we're going to talk a lot of law about how the inclusion and election processes are going to go under the statutes. That's the easy part because the legislature already told us what to do. All we have to do is copy it over into the IGA. The harder part is everything else, okay? One is if the rural district includes the city area, all of the city voters will start paying property taxes to the rural at the rural's property tax rate, which is 11.186 or so I am told. Please correct me. The city does not have to offset that. It can just be 11.186 property tax increase, and we can ask the voters if they want to approve it. Very often the voters will say, no, thank you. Right? I'm getting fire service now. Why would I pay 11 mils of property tax to continue getting fire service? And we encountered this problem. I've encountered it twice, actually. Once in Evans, Colorado, and once up in the mountains in a mountain community. In Evans, they had a municipal fire department, but because of all that weirdness and the expense I talked about, the municipality decided they could not support that fire department anymore. And they decided to spin it off into a fire protection district, which is exactly what they did. In order to make it initially tax neutral to the voters, Evans Fire Protection District asked for a 10 mil property tax increase and the city lowered its property tax by 10 mils. So it was a tax neutral proposition for the voters. One thing we'll want to talk about is there a city offset that can be provided either through property tax or a percentage of sales tax or something to the voters in recognition of the fact that the voters are now paying taxes to the rural and you don't have to pay for a fire department anymore. And Evans didn't come up with 10 mils by accident either. 10 mils was approximately equivalent to the amount of money they were paying to run their fire department. That's how they arrived at that number. We don't have to pay it anymore, so we don't need to collect those taxes anymore. That is a big issue that we'll want to talk about and address in the IGA. We'll also want to talk about property transfers. Most of the real property that the authority operates out of is owned by the city. 2 stations are not. The station we're in right now and Station 7 are both owned by the authority. But if we complete the merger, the rural needs to own those things. Or, and I know cities don't really like quit claiming property. That's not super fun for you. We can do long-term leases, right? But we've got to have some way for the rural to be able to operate out of the fire station. So we'll either do quit claim deeds, warranty deeds, or long-term leases to provide the property to the rural district. Same issue with apparatus and equipment. Right now, all of the apparatus and equipment used by the authority is owned by the authority, with the exception of probably some ARF property and a few other little things. That's easy to transfer. We do that by bills of sale. It's pretty quick. The only thing that's going to hang us up, and actually I didn't mention this on real property either, lease purchase financing. So the authority has lease purchase financing for both the construction of Station 7 and 10 and some outstanding SCBA leases. Not so worried about the SCBA leases. I have had the experience very successfully of actually transferring bonded indebtedness. So I did this in 2020, 2021. Rocky Mountain Fire was merging into Mountain View Fire. Rocky Mountain Fire had outstanding bonds that still needed to be paid off. And we were actually able to successfully work with bond counsel as well as the lender, the bondholder, to get those bonds transferred to Mountain View. Now, they were still paid off only by Rocky Mountain property owners, but Mountain View became the administrator of those bonds. So I am very confident we can transfer these SCBA leases. Fire Station 7 and 10 lease purchase financing over to the rural as the administrator of those. It's just a little bit more paper and process. This bullet point, personnel transfers to the authority, is usually where most of the work happens. In your case, I don't think it will be. Because usually when I'm doing mergers, I'm trying to merge two completely separate personnel systems together. And then we start talking about, well, what are you gonna get paid? Who's gonna carry the benefits, right? Who's gonna be the fire chief? What's the org structure look like? In your case, you're just picking up an entire personnel system that already exists, putting it over here. Okay, so we don't have to, we're gonna wanna address personnel. We're gonna wanna address that transfer and how that's gonna happen, but we don't have to deal with all of the sort of sticky issues that can come when you're merging two totally different fire departments together. We may want to talk about the rural district's name. Right, if you've incorporated or included all of the city area, are you still truly the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District, or is there another name that's more appropriate? A name change can also be a really effective way of celebrating this new organization that's been created, right? You are something now that is new, that is special, and to reflect that in some way in your name. And we'll want to talk about the Rural District Board of Directors. Just like when the city annexes new property, the city council doesn't change, okay? Not by statute. The same is true of the rural board. Just because the rural includes the city area doesn't change the rural district's board unless we agree otherwise. So often what will happen is what I call the surviving department. I don't love that term because it sounds like a takeover, and it's not. But the board that will continue on, one or two members will say, you know what, I'll step down and resign from the board. And then we pick one or two members of the other agency to be appointed so that there is some continuity and representation from both agencies. And we establish what we call an advisory board. Yes.
Is there a limit to the size of the board?
That's a good question. So right now there are 5 board members. By statute, you can go up to 7 board members. We can talk about that. I don't know, Linda, what your experience is with 7-member boards. My experience is they work great for about 5 years while everyone's still really excited. And then after that, you can't find anybody to fill the seats. Right? I don't personally love 7-member boards just because I have really seen districts struggle to get those seats filled. And the statute is clear that once you've gone to a 7-member board, you may never go back. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 7-member boards are tough. And fire protection districts really do operate, I think, on that wonderful economy of scale, but they don't feel like a city, right? So you have 5 members, they don't have to be from a ward. We talked about that ward kind of idea, which is different than a city as well. So yes, you can expand, but that's not what most people do with a consolidation or a merger type.
Yeah, and so what we try to do to accommodate that initial excitement, right? You guys will work hard to put this together. You will be invested. This is your baby, and you want to see your baby get up and walk. Okay, that's a great moment. And we want you to have that. And so what we do is we set up this temporary advisory board where we say, everybody who was a member of the city council or the rural district board gets to participate in the advisory board. You sit at the dais, you get the board packet materials, you can participate in executive sessions. Now we have you sign an NDA basically, provided it's not a conflict of interest. You can put your input in on decisions. What you can't do is vote, right? You don't have a vote at the end of the day, but otherwise you can be in this process until your term of office would have otherwise expired, right? And then folks just kind of fall off the advisory board based on when their election would have occurred, and it sort of naturally winds up. But that gives everybody who was involved in the merger the chance to stay involved through those initial years. Yes, Jeff?
Did I understand you to say that there cannot be wards?
There can be.
Okay, and I guess the reason I ask this, my concern is living in the rural is the cities population wise could certainly control the fire district. And what works well with like school districts is they have districts within the district to make sure there's some type of representation. So maybe it's a thought, we keep 2 directors in the rural and 3 in the city,
Yeah.
assuming that we decide to go this direction.
It's a really confusing term in the Special District Act. I don't know why they did this, but they call them director districts. I just really wish they would have called them wards. But you can set up director districts. Now, I think this is another one that I've seen districts struggle with in the past because you are supposed to keep the population of each district approximately equal. And as municipalities and communities grow, it can be really hard for some districts to be able to track that. You might be in a different situation because you would have just the city area and then the rural area, and you know who's in the city, right? So that may be one thing that we can talk about is, do we want wards? You know, or you could do a 2-2 and an at-large, something like that. But that would be that would be something we would talk about in the IGA. That would be negotiated as part of the IGA process. And I think you can take wards away later. Yes, yeah. So it's not like the 7-member board that once you've made that decision, it's irrevocable. You could set up wards, and then if 20 years it doesn't make sense anymore, a future board could dissolve the wards and go back to general at-large seats. Okay, that's step 1. Razor, can I get you to hit the space bar? Okay, so here is our visual. All right, we have what we have today. Nothing's changed, but we've written a new contract. Okay, that's the fun part for me. It's all fun. That's really fun. Okay. Yeah.
In step 1, you mentioned the fact that it has to be approved by the voters, by the city. Is that really step 1? I mean,
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not missing.
The election is step 2. Okay, but step 1 is gonna talk about the election. Here's when we're gonna go to election. Here's who's gonna pay for the election, right? We're gonna talk about process.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, step 2 is the actual election. So the way that happens, and this process is all set forth by statute. First, the rural district, it's kind of funny, passes a resolution saying, hey, we think it would be cool if we included the city area. And we're gonna have a public hearing on that. Okay, that's step 1, is a resolution proposing the inclusion and setting the date, time, and place for the hearing. Then you mail a letter. The letter, I like to do it as a single page trifold, so it's cheaper, but you can make it however long you want. You mail a letter to all property owners within the city. What's the city's population these days?
80,000 down.
Yeah, about 80,000, maybe 50,000 residents.
Okay. Yeah, so it won't go to renters necessarily, but it'll go to property owners. And it tells the city property owners of this idea, that we think it would be a good idea to include the city area into the rural district and why. And it tells them the date, time, and place of the hearing. Okay. There is a provision of the statutes that gives the property owners the option to say, or to ask rather, I don't want my property in. Leave my house out. Okay. The statutes are a little bit unclear as to who resolves that ask. I think that it's the Board of County Commissioners, but that's something we can talk about with your other council. It could be the city council itself, it could be the rural district. But I will tell you, Board of County Commissioner generally doesn't think it's a great idea to have a Swiss cheese fire district. Your house is in, your house is out, your house is in. Okay, these generally are not approved. But we may have to go to the Board of County Commissioners and say, we think this is a really bad idea, right? If their house catches on fire, we're not gonna not show up. If somebody has a heart attack, we have to go. So to simply have somebody off their residence out doesn't work. County commissioners I have a 100% success rate for fire districts. They tend to be a little bit more skeptical of parking, for whatever it's worth. So we get through that piece of it. And then the rural district conducts a public hearing. That sounds like a very formal process, but it's not really. If you've ever been to the rural district's budget hearing or an exclusion hearing, it's really just an opportunity for members of the public to come and speak and to give their thoughts and comments and to have the board consider those as part of its decision-making process. If the rural district boards decide it still wants to move forward after receiving public comment, then it passes a resolution and certified order of inclusion. We hereby, or excuse me, resolution, yes, a resolution of certified order of inclusion. I want to make sure I'm keeping my amoeba and my cake separate. Saying we would like to hereby order the city area to be included within the rural district. But you don't get to make that choice. Okay, you can pass your resolution, you can pass your certified order, but ultimately the decision's up to the voters. So the next thing we do is we take the resolution and the certified order to the Larimer County District Court. And we tell the court, we've done this process and we would now like you, court, to order an election. Okay? The court, their only job is to say, did you do the process right? Okay? Their job is not to say, is it a good idea or a bad idea? There is no court hearing. There are no witnesses. It's all paper. We send it to the court looks at it and says, yep, you passed your first resolution. Yep, you sent the notice. Yep, you talked to the Board of County Commissioners. Check, check, check. We order your election. Okay. Then we have an election. The election is really interesting because it is a rural district election that exists only within the city. Okay. The rural district is asking the question, but they're asking the question of the city's voters. And the question is, do you want to be included into the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District? And so we have that election. Linda and I were just talking about, there is a statute that allows courts to order elections kind of whenever they feel like it. So under a very liberal reading of the statutes, we could say the court could order the election whenever they want. February 3rd, let's have an election. August 29th, Emily's birthday, she'll really like that, okay? However, that runs into Tabor, right? And Tabor says you can only ask for money during certain elections. And I tend to take a more conservative approach, which says this is a money election because we are asking the voters to increase their property tax by 11.186 mils. So I think there's room for discussion there. I have always done these elections in either November of any year. Those are our statewide general elections, or May of odd numbered years. For our city folks, the reason it's May of odd numbered years is because that's when special districts conduct their regular elections. So I think city year in April, you do your elections in April or November. You guys do it in November, don't you? Some do it in April. Special districts do it in May of odd numbered years. So in our future forward perspective, we're looking at November 24. I'll tell you right now, probably not possible. May 25, November 25, November 26, May 27, right? So those are the cycles that we're looking at. If the voters, at the election, the voters' only question is, do you want to include it to the rural district? So they're only answering one question, but there's a lot more that's behind that. Because the rural district isn't changing. Its mill levy stays the same. The rural district is what was once called de-Gallagherized. Now we're kind of trying to change the vernacular to revenue stabilized. That will stay in place. You are term limit exempted, correct? So your term limit exemption will continue. All of that stays in place. It doesn't change. And if the city's voters, by a vote of 50% plus one, say yes, they want to be included, we go back to the district court. Guess what, court? Great news. The voters approved our election. We now want you to issue an order of inclusion. And it's the same thing. The court just looks at the documents and sees if we did the process right, and issue an order of inclusion. That order is not effective the day you get it. It is effective the day you record it. Okay, the date and time of recording in the records of the Larimer County Clerk and Recorder is the date and time the inclusion happens. That is different, however, from the date and time that the property is moved on the tax rolls. Okay, so if we have an election in November of 25 and we get our court order on December 15th of 25, and you recorded on December 16th, boom, like magic, boundaries have changed. But the property will not be moved like magic on December 16th. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about in the timing section, when the property gets moved. Questions on that, on the election? No? Okay. So here's what we have now. Here's our visual. The pre-inclusion agreement still exists at this point in time because we still have a lot of work to do. Okay? And what we have now is the rural district has sent its amoeba arms around the city, and it's now kind of hugging the city. And LFRA still exists. Okay, that's our process at the end of step 2. And now here's where we start the implementation. We've got the voters' authority, the voters' approval to accomplish the merger. Now we actually have to move all of our stuff. We talked about this some already, and so I think I can zip through this piece pretty quickly, but we need to transfer the real property. That will come from the city to the rural district, either by, I put quitclaim deeds here, we could do warranty deeds as well, or long-term leases if you don't want to outright transfer. We need to transfer stations 7 and 10 from the authority to the rural district, and we need to deal with the lease purchase financing on those two. Again, that just, it makes the process a little more processy, but I feel pretty confident we can do it. Then we need to transfer the apparatus and vehicles. I've done that historically through an omnibus vehicles bill of sale. So your staff members can draw straws on who has to go get the title and VIN numbers off of every piece of apparatus. If it's on wheels, what's the title and VIN number on that? But we put together an omnibus bill of sale, we transfer it that way. Equipment, same thing, transfer through an omnibus personal property bill of sale, though I do not any longer make people list each and every nozzle and radio. I did once. Again, we'll talk about the SCBA leases. Unless Linda or Vince or somebody from their offices feels really, really confident in the ability to transfer the lease purchase financing, I got a guy. Do you know KCBO?
Yeah.
Yeah, Casey is the one who handled the bond transfer for us. I am not a finance person, really. I know just enough to be super, super dangerous. But when we're dealing with something as complex and sensitive as this, that I would pull in Casey to handle the transfer release.
For those that might not know, could you tell them what SCBA?
Yes, it stands for self-contained breathing apparatus. I got it, Chief. You saw the split second of panic, didn't you? No, self-contained breathing apparatus. They're not cheap. Nothing at the fire department is cheap, right? So I was actually surprised you didn't have more lease purchases. So you guys are doing awesome. Other questions on this slide? Yeah.
Going back to the inclusion exclusion thing, there's been some discussion about including some areas of Cedar Park that are currently on the border, or west border of the rural district. Is that something that can be done as part of this process, or is that a discussion for another day?
So Emily, it goes beyond what we currently, our 187 square miles, we have basically people that we are serving on the emergency side, outside of our current limits. When the authority was established, it was, I think, too logistically heavy to try to bring those folks in. So the border was set and those folks still get to some degree services. Where it gets complicated is now when we start offering non-emergent services such as mitigation work, they would be literally benefiting without paying taxes.
Yeah. How big is it?
There's multiple, right?
Yeah, there's 4 filings out there.
So what would you estimate, population or houses?
It's growing all the time, but it's very much smaller than what's.
Several hundred, would you agree?
Like more than 20?
Yeah, there might be 100, 150, something like that.
Okay, and there is also, when we talk about Pinewood, there's some aspects of that that would fall into that as well.
So I want to be sensitive in how I answer this, because this is really a question more for Linda than it is for me. So Linda, you can step on my toes or kick me under the table later. I've had this come up before, in exactly these conversations. Could we include it as part of this process? Yes, we could. It would dramatically complicate it. Dramatically. What I would say, is this process of proposing inclusion, notifying the property owners and having an election is available to the rural at any time, legally. Now I'll let you deal with the politics of it and all that. But I think part of the discussion is maybe, would it be a good idea to do that before this happens? Right? And then you sort of amoeba them and then you amoeba the city? Or would it be a good idea to maybe do it after the city's in, then we go get Pinewood, right? I think probably a two-step process is going to be less overall brain damage and stress.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I completely agree. And Bill, I think you were not on the board when we already had an inclusion of part of Pinewood. Did have an election, they are included. That really just involved talking with the HOA up there, so. You know, if there's folks that are interested, it is always easier to have processes that are separated, in my opinion, because then we end up with different kind of political conversations that aren't unnecessary. So yeah, we could definitely do that in the next year.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll just, to Linda's point, I mean, as we start doing this mitigation work, that conversation is starting.
It's now.
Yeah, and those folks are well aware that basically here's the limit line. We're not gonna not respond, but when we start going into the non-emergent services, it starts to get very complicated, so.
Hey chief, I just sent you that email with the sperm allergen properties.
Yeah, I asked how many there were only because if your community is small enough, you can put together a landowner petition for inclusion where the landowners ask. But you have to have 100% of the people sign on. So in a very small community, 12 to 20 residences, it's doable. Beyond 20 residences, you're always gonna have like the 4 people who just won't do it, right? And then that process isn't available anymore. So it sounds like this area is too big for that. So you would move on to your election option instead.
Yeah, you're talking almost total, almost 450 structures.
Yeah, you're never gonna get 450 people.
I'll ask a somewhat complicated question, I think. So currently, like in the city of Loveland, we have a large area, Centerra, that is in a URA, and therefore the property tax that is, taken is diverted back to the development. Under 301, a ballot initiative was passed, any new URA or changes would have to go to the voters. How does that work in something like this when it's a rural authority? Would they need to approve something like that you're gonna divert property taxes? Complicated, so.
No, URAs are complicated. And URAs are tough for fire departments or fire districts in particular to, sort of conceptually grapple with. On the one hand, it benefits the community and the fire district itself to have areas that are undeveloped and unserved to become developed. When you look really long picture, in the short term, it's really tough for them because you have an area that was grass that did not need much fire protection or emergency medical services, that now all of a sudden is very populated with humans and needs a lot of service and they don't get revenue for it. So that 25-year period is tricky. And so there has been many conversations and many legislative cycles where URAs have been tackled and how do we handle those with fire protection districts? Linda's smiling. We sit on a legislative policy committee together. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Emily and Madam Mayor. I'd say any existing URA within our municipal limits, if we were to game this out, let's say we're, several years down the road and there is a fire protection district in Loveland, that mill levy would not be captured by any current urban renewal plan.
Correct.
Area, right? So that's not, so the urban renewal plan area, when we, when the council approves those, we list all of the tax collecting entities. And we have IGAs with each one of those tax collecting entities. So it's not as though the city would, or the LRA, the Urban Renewal Authority, would be able to collect TIF off of a new governmental entity that is opposed to mill levy. So what would have to happen is the LRA would have to amend the urban renewal plan area to seek incorporation of a newly imposed mill levy by the new rural district. And of course, that would be a substantial modification that would require now our, 301. So we're talking, that would be a longer process before any TIF would be generated from any existing URA. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, very
Yeah.
complicated.
It is complicated, and it's because they keep going in the statutes and trying to tinker with it in a way that balances all interests, and it's really, really hard in this space. It's really hard to do that, so you've got a great land use and URA expert here, but yeah, it is tricky. Yeah,
Thank you.
what else? All right, we want to talk step 3 or 4? I think we're on 4. Fraser, you gotta push the button. Thank you. Okay, step 4, people and paper. Okay, we gotta transfer people and paper. The people are currently employed by the Loveland Rescue Fire Authority. They will need to be employed by the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District. Strictly speaking, you can do that on any day of the year, but Andrea will have a stroke. And we like Andrea, and we don't want to give her a stroke. It is often desirable to accomplish a transfer of personnel on January 1st. Because you don't have to deal with issues of W-2s, right? W-2s coming from 2 different agencies. You don't have to try to deal with a mid-year transfer of benefits. Now that may not be as big of a problem for you guys, because you would just pick up your benefits transfer and move them over. So I mean, maybe in your context, January 1st doesn't matter so much, but you have a huge workforce and you've got the time to accomplish the transfer of personnel, and January 1 just usually is cleaner. It's cleaner from a benefits enrollment perspective. It's cleaner from a W-2 and taxation perspective. It's often, though again, maybe not here, cleaner from a benefits accrual perspective. So I usually have that in my head. We're going to transfer personnel on January 1st, 2020 something. And otherwise you tell me differently, right? But I start with the presumption that we're going to do this on January 1 because it saves everybody a lot of stress, including your personnel. For some reason, they like moving on January 1 too. They don't really like moving on July 7th. And speaking of your personnel, we want to make the transfer as clean and simple and stress-free as possible. Your folks have a really important job and they shouldn't be worrying about this. They've got all kinds of other things to worry about. And so the way that I have done this in the past is we call it an automatic, we call it actually a lateral transfer of employment. It's a really important term that happens automatically. And we pick a date. So let's say it's January 1st, 2027. That date is not an accident. We'll talk about that date again soon. We issue them, each employee, a letter. And the letter says, as you know, we have been working really hard to accomplish the merger of the city and the rural district. We are so excited that the voters have approved this. We're getting ready to on our go live date, and your employment will be automatically transferred with no further action needed from you on January 1st, 12:01 a.m. on January 21st or January 1st, 2023. If you don't want to be employed by the rural district, let the chief know. Otherwise, you're good. Okay, so we issue that letter. The letter includes their title. You'll keep your same title, you'll keep your same rank, you'll keep your same pay, you'll keep your same benefits. That changes when I'm doing 2 fire districts, but it won't change here unless you want it to. So that should be pretty easy for them. Same thing with the transfer of accrued benefits and accrued leaves. We're just going to pick up what they have and we're going to move it over here. Now your benefits are going to be issued by the rural district instead of the authority though. Okay, so we're going to have to work with our benefits providers to make sure that they get the right name. We're also going to have to work with our other employee benefit providers to make sure they move the sponsor as well. That's FPPA, that's your private retirement plan providers. That's your health, dental, and vision insurance providers. If you do something like AFLAC or voluntary life insurance, we're gonna wanna talk to them. Because right now it all says employee of Loveland Fire Rescue Authority, and we need it to say employee of local rural fire protection district. And that takes us back to the concept of a lateral transfer. And I should have put that right here. You can put like one of those little arrows, right? Lateral. There's two ways to move personnel en masse. One is a fire and rehire. At 12:59 or 11:59 PM, you're terminated from the authority, and at 12 o'clock AM, you're hired by the rural. That is not a good way to do it. And the reason it's not a good way to do it is when somebody is fired and rehired, particularly for FPPA purposes, they have to start over on their death and disability plan. They have to fill out all new forms, and any conditions they might have developed while they were employed at LFRA are now called pre-existing conditions, and they don't get coverage. And we do not want that, okay? So over the years, going as far back as 2013, I've worked with FPPA to develop a different process that we call lateral transfer, which says we're just shifting everybody over one slate. And there is no break in service, there is no break in employment, there is no fire and rehire. And everything that they had when they were at the authority for benefits purposes just carries on under a new name. And FPPA has gotten really, really good at this. They're slick. Oh, the other one I didn't put here is the CFH Trust. Right? You've got benefits under the Colorado Firefighter Heart and Cancer Benefits Trust. They're also really good at this. And so we will move all those benefits over as well. So personnel, usually a really sticky wicket. I think not so much a sticky wicket for you guys. One that is always a sticky wicket, no matter who you are, is transferring contracts. Lawyers love contract. We make you write a contract.
We know.
And yes.
I have two quick questions, okay? I'm assuming from the employee perspective, this also includes our fine volunteers that are up the canyon.
Yes.
That contract will flow through as well.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I know it's way premature, we really haven't talked about it, but
The union really has stepped up in the past elections, and in the event we're gonna talk about collective bargaining at some point with the union, if we have that discussion. How does that flow into this from a union perspective?
That's a conversation that would happen between the rural district and the union after the transfer of employment. I think. I suppose you could negotiate sort of a agreement to enter into a CBA once they're employed by you. But again, these are questions more for Linda, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yeah, but the rural ultimately is going to be the employer. So any collective bargaining that may ever happen in the future with the employees would be with the rural district as the employer. You can't enter into a collective bargaining agreement with an organization that you don't employ yet, right? So you'd either have to wait until after the transfer of employment is complete, or agree later. And that would be for help you all sort out.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Secret option number 3, I guess the authority could enter into a CBA and then transfer the CBA, but I'm not the Girl Scouts, but I want to do that. Right? If I'm gonna be the employer, I want to be the negotiating for the table. Right? The rest of your contracts lie with the authority. You have IGAs with numerous surrounding parties. You have a beautiful air curtain burner agreement that we just put together with the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition. You have vendor agreements. You have agreements for with Frontline Mobile Health, with Ember Alliance, and probably a billion other things I don't even know about. So those contracts, hold on just a sec, need to be moved from the authority to the rural district. And so the way I've done this in the past is I ask your fine staff, Cheryl, I apologize in advance, to put together a list of all the contracts that you have that are still effective and to find copies. And she gave me the thumbs up, so she still likes me. And then we read them. And we see what they say about changing parties. Some contracts will say this contract cannot be assigned. Okay, sometimes we get that. Sometimes we get this contract can only be assigned with the approval of both parties. Sometimes a contract doesn't say anything about assignment at all. So we put those in 3 buckets. For the ones that don't say anything about assignment at all, I'm gonna take a permissive approach and say, we can do it. Okay, we pass a resolution saying, a joint resolution or an agreement saying that the parties agree that the attached exhibits are getting transferred from the authority to the rural district. And then we let the other party know, like, hey, by the way, your contract's with the rural now. For bucket 2, right, these can only be assigned with approval, we gotta go get approval. So we put together a little assignment of contract form. You have this contract with the authority is transferring to the rural district as successor entity, please sign below to say it's okay to be assigning your contract over to the rural. Then we have our last one, this contract can't be assigned, full stop. Well, that's only true until we amend the contract, right? So then we prepare a contract amendment that either amends the parties or amends the assignment clause, and we get it done that way. This is a process that, other than your lawyers and your administrative staff, largely happens behind the scenes for everybody else. Okay, your personnel generally aren't in the middle of that. But we do need to move that all over, and it takes a long time. It takes a long time, partly because it's a lot of reading and drafting, but partly because we can't control those third parties. We'd love to be able to control the third parties, but can't. Right, so a lot of it is just like pinging them, hey, do you look at this? Hey, can we get your signature? Hey, remember us? It eventually does get. Okay, so here's what we have. Yes.
Grants or applications in process, does moving to a district change the eligibility for those? And those that were issued under the authority obligated, or did they just transfer?
We would want to talk to the grantors. So typically when you obtain a grant, you do sign a grant agreement, or you're subject to the grant terms and conditions, something like that. I would treat it like other contracts and be talking to the grantor about what we're doing, right? We're not changing our mission. We're not changing our purpose. We're not changing the services we provide. We're just providing it under a new name with a bigger entity. I would say we would want to do that. That would fall on the urgency scale, somewhere in between lease purchase agreements and general contracts, right? Kind of in the middle. I would have a hard time seeing a grantor be really upset about that, but I can't guarantee it wouldn't happen. In terms of eligibility, I can't think of a contract that LFRA would be eligible to receive. The rural district would not, unless there is anything specific to the city. Unless there are any grants that are available to municipalities that aren't available to other types of local government. And I can't think of any, but again, that doesn't mean they're not out there.
And related question, are there any implications from a federal perspective? Either reimbursement for.
You file your what's it called? Super? What's it called? Not AFR.
AFR.
I didn't recognize any of those.
It's no, gosh darn it, this is going to bother me. Do you guys do wildland dispatching? Do you go to other places, Texas, California? Idaho?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
There's a form that you file with the state that says.
SERP agreement.
SERP, SERP agreement. See, that's what it was.
The rest of the day.
Yeah, but no, I'm not aware of anything that would change at the rural level.
Are you asking about potential for like ARPA funding and things like that in the future?
No, just a general question.
Director Jesse, I only have one thought. I know that the city of Loveland works a lot with the DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs with the state of Colorado. I don't know to what extent the rural district interacts with that state agency. But
A lot.
we have a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, if the rural district is already interacting with DOLA, I know the city does. We get a lot of grants through that state agency. And so if you're already eligible generally through that agency, I can't think of just a solid chunk of the city's grants will come through that agency. So I just thought I'd ask that question. Thank you.
In some spaces, it may make things simpler. I can't guarantee that, but the one that I was thinking of right now, because DOLA has a big job in front of it currently. But the legislature went to special session in November and they passed Senate Bill 23-2001, right, about adjustments to property tax rates in the coming year. They provided a property tax backfill for fire departments. And it applies to everybody. It applies to fire districts, it applies to fire authorities, it applies to municipal fire departments, county improvement districts, metro districts. DOLA is having a bear of a time trying to figure out how much revenue a municipal fire department loses or an authority loses. Really easy to figure out how to backfill a fire district. This was the property tax before, this is what it is now, you get the delta. So in some respects, it may simplify. There may be other times it becomes more complicated. It's probably a wash in the end. All right, so here is our visual for step 4. We've got our agreement is still alive, the election's been approved, and now we're starting to move things over. Personnel benefit plans and contracts are flowing from LFRA into the rural. And now LFRA doesn't have anything anymore. Right? We've moved our stations, we've moved our apparatus, our contracts, our equipment, our personnel, and LFRA is paper. It is a contract. And so we are going to dissolve LFRA by terminating that IGA. So it's sort of faded over there. Okay. And now, once we get to this point, there's no text slide on this one. You can hit the space bar again. We can start talking about these other two. I put these at the end as additional steps because they can really happen at any point in the process. They can happen very early in the process, they can happen at the very end of the process, or any point in the middle. So it's really kind of where it makes sense to tuck them in. We talked about reconstituting the board of directors and the advisory board. I won't go through all of it again. We also talked about changing the rural district's name. Changing the name of a fire district or any special district is a pretty simple process. You adopt a resolution approving the change of name. I've had districts publish notice of a public hearing. It's not required by statute, but it's not a terrible idea either. You file that resolution with the district court. The district court issues an order of change of name and you record it. So it is a process that truly we can tuck in at any point when it makes sense. Yes, Jeff.
Could you talk more about reconstituting a rural district board of directors and the timeline there?
The timeline, so the way that typically works is right now, nobody on the city is eligible to sit on the rural district board. They don't own property in the rural district and they don't live in the rural district, presumably. I mean, maybe you do. Let's pretend you don't. So nobody within the city is eligible to sit on the rural district board currently. But when we complete step 2, all the way back at step 2, that election, when the election is approved and the rural district puts its boundaries around the city and encompasses them at the date and time of recording, now everybody in the city is eligible to sit on the board because now they all either live in the rural or own property there. And so that is the moment when we can start reconstituting the board. You don't have to do it at that moment. You could do it later, but you can't do it sooner. It's a tipping point. And the way that usually happens is we choose when the moment is going to be. Is it going to be right at the end of step 2? Is it going to be at a different date? But we pick a day and we say on this particular day, 1 or 2 members or 3, however many you want, of the rural district board agree to resign. Yes.
So is it the rural board deciding that or the authority?
It is pre-agreed as part of the pre-inclusion IGA. And you guys can, you all would discuss amongst yourselves who that's gonna be.
So would city council be involved too?
Well, you both will decide together whether you're going to reconstitute the board at all. Let's say you agree that, yes, we would like some city representation on the rural board. That is the negotiation that happens. Then the rural board decides amongst itself who will be the ones that resign. Typically as well. Sometimes it's folks who have been on the board for a long time. They're just really kind of tired. They don't want to do it anymore. Sometimes it's folks who are coming up on a term limit. Sometimes it's folks who are willing to just step back, but you decide amongst yourselves, like who will be the 1, 2, or 3 people who are going to resign, and we name them in the IGA. You don't have to, But it saves so much heartburn later because you don't, it's hard to leave that loose end open. It just is hard on the board. And then we say, once these 1, 2, or 3 rural district members resign, the remaining rural district members will appoint 1, 2, or 3 people from the city. You could say, for example, we could structure it so that the merged district board is the same as the then existing authority board. We can structure it that way. So rural district members who aren't on the authority board resign, city members who are on the authority board are appointed. Or you can do it differently. You can do it any way you want, just a contract. Then everybody who's not continuing on the rural district board of directors officially then joins the advisory board throughout the balance of their term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, at what point would the citizens have an election then? Is that up to the board to decide
Nope.
or?
It would be at your next regular election, May of odd numbered years.
Okay, we normally don't do everybody at the same time, so there must be a process there.
Right, so that's true. So any appointed board, any vacancy that is created by a resignation and is filled by an appointment is treated just like any other appointment. So if you have, let's say we accomplished this in May of 25. Actually, I'm gonna say November. Let's say we accomplished the merger in November of 25, and the new board members are seated in December of 25. Your next election, board election, will be May of 2027. And those city members would have to run in May of 2027. They only fill that partial term before they have to run to fill the remaining portion of any partial term. So they don't get a special status as part of the appointment. But it is a way to have joint representation for at least that initial.
Makes sense.
Cool. Okay. We got on that, push the button. And here's what you're end up with. This is the end result. We are now in Atlanta. Okay, we made it. What you have now is a rural district that encompasses the entire rural area as well as the entire city area, and it provides all emergency services as a single unified entity. That's a long road to travel from San Francisco to Atlanta. But this end result is actually pretty common, right? This is a pretty common structure to have a district that covers both a rural area and a city. Yes, Jack.
We've had discussion about what the benefits are for becoming a district. What are the cons or the disadvantages or the problems?
Lack of diversity in revenue is one. Right now, one big benefit that authorities have that fire protection districts don't is access to sales tax. And they don't have access to sales tax directly, but they have access to the city's sales tax. Right, Brian is going, yeah, I know. That is one benefit that I see in authorities, that when property taxes are down, they tend to stay a little bit more stable because they aren't exclusively reliant on property taxes. Another drawback could be, now if you establish director wards, you might be able to mitigate this drawback, but one would be concentration of representation in a single area. Most of your population would be in the city. So if you do everything at large, you could end up with 5 members out of the city being voted to represent the entire rural area. That would be a drawback, at least for those individuals in the rural area. Other drawbacks. Linda, what do you think? Those are the big 2 that come to mind.
They're the biggies. I mean, there's always people tinkering with Title 32. It's easier to mess with a special district, honestly, than, the municipality, so.
And I mean, to that point, though, there is serious conversation about tinkering with Title 32 to give fire districts the authority to collect sales tax. So that tinkering can go in kind of any direction.
This might be a question more for the chief, but would there be a difference in the allocation of resources under a district as opposed to an authority.
No, we do that through the accreditation process, assess the risk and make a determination for a standard.
The other thing that I see a lot when you have a district that covers a city area is human people, residents, voters, however you want to think about them, don't really understand special districts, right? It's fascinating to me. I didn't know that a special district existed until I became a special district attorney. And yet we've got over 2,000 special districts in the state of Colorado. So it's just really interesting to me how special districts just they fly under the radar, governmental radar. And so because a lot of people don't really appreciate what a special district is, there can be some misunderstanding of the voters. They come to the city and they're like super mad at something the fire district did, you know, not us, right? Or reverse, right? They come to the rural district and are super mad about something the city did and you're like, not us, particularly if you have the same name. Right? And a city of Arvada and Arvada Fire Protection District confused all the time. But I don't know that that's any different than what you're living with now. If they don't understand the special district, do they understand an authority properly?
My next question is with regard to the maintenance of equipment. And I'm not clear, is it provided by the city now? And so would the district contract back to the city to continue that? Or would there be a process for creating that expertise within the district in order to achieve?
Yeah, there's a number of services that the city provides us, including IT services, a portion of finance services and so forth. So all of that would eventually transition, whether we would do a full-fledged transition of fleet. It would be up in the air, but right now, just as Fraser was referencing, they do it for Berthoud, they do it for Front Range, they do it for Glen Haven. So there's a number of agreements in place for the city right now.
That was a great question though, because that just reminded me of, I won't necessarily say it's a drawback, but it is a complication. When I'm merging two fire districts and they each have a personnel system, at least one of those personnel is going to survive, right? We gotta pour all these people into it. The rural district right now, as far as I know, you don't have like a robust HR system because you have probably the Canyon Battalion, but I don't know what your system is for payroll, for HR, for benefits administration for 100+ employees, like on day one, right? Like here, you're having centuplets, right? Like, here's your 100 new babies. So you're asking the rural district to develop an extremely robust administrative structure in an extremely compressed time frame. That's going to be a challenge for the rural district. There is a way though to ease that transition, and we had the same problem in Evans, right? We had a brand new bouncing baby fire district with no structure at all and a city's worth of employees and stuff. And so we did enter into an agreement, the district and the city entered into an administrative services agreement for a period of years where the city continued to provide HR, payroll, IT, and a handful of other services while the district was putting that in place. And then that agreement fell away and now the district stands wholly on its own. But yeah, that is going to also be a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you.
I have a question for Brian. Brian, at our 9.564 mils currently, how much revenue? And one, I'm thinking maybe 17 million. How much revenue did we get by 17 million?
Yeah, in that range.
How much can we afford to credit? You know, because, you know, we go, you know, we're going to charge 11 point whatever it was. How much could we afford to credit of that 9.564 that we currently?
Well, to Emily's point, right, if we go to an election, we would want to consider that kind of revenue offset.
Yeah.
So the issue we might have is that currently our contribution to the LFRA is more than our property tax revenue.
Okay.
So we have a problem there. And as expenses for the LFRA grow,
Yeah.
then that ask is gonna get higher and higher and higher when we go to the election.
Okay.
And our credit back, right, is growing with them.
So we really can't afford to give them credit.
Well,
You're already paying
Yeah.
at this point, you're paying more than your property tax collection.
Okay.
So the real
question comes up as, do you want to give up all of your property tax? That's kind of question one. So if you only want to give up a percentage of it to keep your revenue diversified, what else is available to make it tax neutral for the voters? You do have use taxes, your auto use tax plus a percentage of your property tax would be close to square. Well, you're already, so the issue is you're already paying
Yeah.
the authority, so you won't notice when you stop paying the authority, but you stop collecting some of that revenue. It should, in theory, net out for you. So at the end of the day, you're no worse off. You just don't have to worry about our asks getting bigger each year.
But at this point, like our 80% of the LFRA would be what we'd have to contemplate getting back.
Yeah.
Or credit, that number. It's getting large.
Okay.
So we would have to look at either all of the revenue or some of it. Right, make voters aware that, okay, we're gonna get back 80% and we're getting X percent tax increase functionally.
Yeah.
So those options would be on the table too, but that's a very sticky problem. So how much would we give away? Where would it be from, to Fraser's point? Yeah, we could look at other, I don't know, for example, auto use tax, voters might be like, well, gee, tax. Well, the times I buy a car, versus, which would we look at sales tax? I mean, that'd really be the only place we could go.
Yeah.
That would affect, that would be meaningful. Again, if we were to say, oh, okay, we're gonna lower the use tax, the builders would say, great.
That's not my only, Mayor, but there's value to stay diversified in the city.
Yeah.
Not take anything to zero, kind of move it around a little bit
Sure.
and stay diversified.
You've got a bunch of dials, so it's how do you want to turn your dials? It's great if you can turn the dials so that the net effect on the voter is zero.
Yeah.
You might not be able to, right? Maybe the net effect on the voter is a 2 mil increase, and we have to sort out how to message that.
Or the revenue time, I'm sorry.
Well, in Fort Collins, they have a fire district, right? They have 9.56.
They have a fire authority, but
Oh, but it's not a separate mill?
Correct.
well, so
It's out of their
so-
9.564 mills, because they.
Peter Fire Authority is an authority made up of the city of Fort Collins and the Peter Valley Fire Protection District. Their formula is different than yours though, so. LFRA, I think of it as being funded on the back end, right? The LFRA creates the budget first, and then it makes the ask to the city and rural for how much money they need and it's approved. Hooters is flipped, so Hooters has a formula where they get X% of the city's sales tax, X% of the city's property tax, X% of Cooter Valley's property tax. And whatever that number is, that's what you gotta work with, right? So they can do it the other way, but they do take a percentage of city sales and property tax.
Maybe the other way is to think that the total amount yielded by the new mill levy would be less than where the LFRA is. And there's some plan to match, to live within those means and get back to that. So we would say, hey, listen, we'll support certain millage, but if it gets too high, then the city can't afford to credit all that back, or it's gonna be a losing proposition because it's too much of an increase. So it's like, listen, it's gonna yield 20 million. And that's it. As opposed to the 24, 25.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll have critics watching us closely. Yeah, it'll never pass.
Oh,
Yeah.
We gotta be real fair in our dealings with each other here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things, and thank you for the presentation.
Of course. And then I've got one more slide on timing, but let's continue with questions first.
But this kind of falls into the timing, your timeline and doing different things. One of the things we talked about here and certainly, outreach to the rural district, outreach to the city. There seems to be a marketing piece that goes along with this, that I'd really like for you to kind of lean in with, how did that?
Let's talk about that.
Because we're gonna have to, get to the voters, get them early, come up with a common voice from the district and the city. And start a cadence on that. What does that look like? So
Yeah.
if you could lean into that a little bit.
That's a great question. I'll zip through this slide really quickly. These are all examples of jurisdictions where this process has been completed. Now, Evans is not really, okay? They've got a lot of similarities because it's a city, so I included them, but not really. These other 3 use this process that I'm talking about. So if you are interested in connecting with individuals from these communities, we have contacts. Okay, and so that's why I put them up here. I thought about being really cute and making these little amoebas, but then I decided not to be that flippant. Okay, let's go to the timing. Let's talk about timing because, this is a process. It is a statutory process, and so we have to follow the sort of statutory timing rules, okay? Now, I have put in estimates based on my experience of how long I think each step will take. Each step could happen much faster, much slower. Some steps could happen faster, but not all of them because the statute says they can't. All right. And I had January 21st, 2027 in my mind the entire time I was looking at these timelines. And the reason for that is the rural district has agreed to provide funding for, I believe, 11 positions. Is that right? Which is a substantial amount of money for the next 3 years to the authority. And that funding is over and above the 20% contribution that they pay. And that's 2024, 2025, and 2026, okay, that we have access to that funding under the current agreement. And so I was looking at this from, we need to stand up our new district and turn on the lights on January 21st, 2027. If you guys want to agree to a different date, we can make that happen later. We can't make it happen sooner, probably, okay? Let's assume we're aiming for January 1st, 2027. In that case, you have 2 election cycles under the conservative Tabor view focus, where you could go to the voters and ask for this inclusion. One is in May of 2025. That is 13 months and 2 weeks from now, okay? That's fast to do an inclusion. Not impossible, but it's fast. The other option is November of 2025. We're gonna have a statewide general election. You could do it then. Regardless of which date you pick, it has to be by mail ballot. Again, this is a money question in my view. A May election will be more expensive because the rural district will have to pay to mail 80,000 ballots. A November election will be less expensive because you can get on the statewide ballot. On the flip side, yes.
Doesn't make a difference as far as how many other ballot issues might be out there. In other words, in the creation of a district, doesn't make more sense to do it in May when it's less.
Yeah, I mean, and that was what I was about to say is November's cheaper, May is more expensive. November will have a higher turnout, May will have a lower turnout. And sometimes that's part of the calculation as well. Yeah, Jen.
This may be more semantics than everything else, but we keep talking about the rural paying for the election. Is the authority actually paying it? We're gonna continue.
We would put that in a pre-inclusion IGA. Who's paying, right? Either way, somebody's paying. And November will be cheaper. November will have a higher turnout. Sometimes that's beneficial, sometimes it's not beneficial. Right, these are all conversations that we have. So I've got our faster track and our slower track. Under the 2 tracks. The first draft of drafting the pre-inclusion IGA, I estimated 6 to 12 months, right? And that's because there are a lot of details that need to be worked out around funding, around board representation, around all of these issues that we've been talking about today. If everybody were really motivated, I think we could complete that drafting within 6 months. But it doesn't give you very much time to talk to your electorate, to your point, right? It doesn't give you very much time to engage in citizen education. A slower time frame would be to start now and take an entire year to draft that pre-inclusion IGA and to engage in the citizen education campaign. Once we start the election process, both the rural, the city, the authority, you're all going to be subject to the Fair Campaign Practices Act, right? And so we have to keep that in mind as well, that any citizen engagement and education you want to do has to happen during step 1. And it has to happen really carefully, right? We want to go to the citizens and say, citizens, we have a problem. The problem is that it is really expensive to run a fire department. And the city and the rural are struggling to fund the fire department in this way continually. And we have a proposed solution. The proposed solution is we incorporate the city into the rural district. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you voters about your thoughts, and you can send letters, you can have town halls, you can do presentations, I can come do this for your voters, right? We can do whatever you want. But it's a proposal and a request for feedback, and it happens early. So the most time you're gonna have to do that is under the slower track under step one. Because once we pass that, once we go to the court and say, dear court, please issue an order of election, now we're under the Fair Campaign Practices Act, and that opportunity to engage with your citizens in that way is really curtailed. Once we get the pre-inclusion IGA drafted, then we get into the election process. The election process is what it is. It takes as long as it takes. There are some parts of the election process where it's like, you can do this within 75 to 100 days, or you can do this up to 67 days before the election. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there, but not a lot. Elections take 7 to 9 months to run. In the faster track, we've got 7 months. In the slower track, we have 9. Okay, so that's how that runs out. And then we have our election date, would either be May 6th of 25 or November 4th of 25. Now, I told you before that the date of the election and the date you get the court order is not related to the date that the property is moved on the tax rolls. And that is because of a statute which is 39-1-110, for anybody who wants to go read it later. It says, when you include property into a special district, we care whether that property was included before or after May 1st. If it was included before May 1st, the assessor pretends it was included in January and it moves the property onto the tax rolls effective in that year. If it was included May 1st or later, the assessor says, too late, I'm not moving property on your tax rolls until January 1st of the next year. So it's in your jurisdiction, you're obligated to provide a service, et cetera, but you don't actually start assessing taxes until January 1st of the next year, and you don't collect anything until January 1st of the year after that. Okay, there's a time gap. And it doesn't matter when we do our election. If we do our election in May or in November, either way, we're recording this thing after May 1st. Okay, so either way, the property isn't getting moved on the tax rolls until January 1st of 26. That's going to create a gap. So I was talking with Chief about, well, what do we do about the gap, right? What do we do about that year where we're not collecting any taxes and yet we're serving a population of 80,000 in an urban area? And that again would be part of the pre-inclusion IGA and the promise to the voters to have an offset. We don't want the offset to happen before the collection starts, right? So what we would say is the city isn't going to offset the taxes until the collection starts. The city is going to continue to collect whatever taxes it was collecting before, and you will continue to pay now the rural for 1 year to fill that gap. Then we have the offset kick in when the collection stops, and that way we don't have a huge hole in our budget. That's due to nothing other than timing. So that's a really important piece. If we go back to our May to November election, now we need to transfer the physical assets, the contracts, and get ready to transfer the personnel. Again, the getting ready part is talking to FPPA, CFH Trust, health insurance, all the people. Typically 6 to 9 months. You are probably on the 6-month track or shorter for real property, equipment, people. It's the contracts. It's the contracts. It's just a lot of words. Lawyers love words. The additional steps of reconstituting the rural board and changing the rural district name, should you choose to take either or both actions, does not add time to our project. It typically is occurring somewhere in here. Okay, so it just folds into there somewhere. And then we have our personnel transfer date. If you go to election in May of 25, we should be able to transfer the personnel on January 1st, 26. If you don't go to election until November of 25, we can't probably get that done in 6 weeks. We would be looking at a year to transfer the personnel in January of 27. Then we terminate the authority. We dissolve it, but sometimes there is wind-up activities, sometimes there is not. And the wind-up activities is usually, we are still trying to harass third parties into getting us back our assignment forms. That's, and you have to do little things too, like, do you have a Color Trust account? Did you Color Trust bank account? Oh, you're all with the city. Rural has a Color Trust account. So you gotta, sometimes you have to move bank accounts, sometimes you have to you're gonna have to tell the assessor, like, hey, assessor, like, start putting all these taxes over here. We give ourselves a little bit of time. I don't think you will have as much as other agencies. We would expect to wind up and terminate the authority sometime between January and June of the year of the personnel transfer. And then you will actually start getting the tax revenue out of the city area on January 1st, 2027. Yes.
I'm thinking of things like the benefits that are in the authority now. Are there additional costs as we try to transfer the provider of those benefits to the district where it was a larger pool of people that?
Who do you have benefits with now? Who do you provide benefits through now?
I think it's the city, isn't it?
The
We have our own.
Yeah,
LFRA.
LFRA has its own benefits. We're completely separate from the city in that regard.
Does the rural provide benefits as well? No, I didn't think so. Okay, I was confused, but I thought
That's my
maybe.
question. I was confused about the city.
So that's the process.
So to your point about marketing, right, getting in front of this. And Emily, with your experience, does it make sense when you're having this conversation, step one, to our constituents saying, it's not gonna be the rural district, we're gonna call it Fred, whatever you wanna call it. So that there's ownership of that name. It's not, well, we're being absorbed by the rural. We're creating a district that stands on its own. In my opinion, I know it seems premature, but I think that's really important that part gets figured out. So we have that marketing piece of my opinion.
That's a huge part of the messaging. The one challenge when I'm talking to 2 fire districts and I'm giving them 3 roads to Atlanta. I have a different slide that has different benefits, right? And then over here, I check off which road will have that benefit. One benefit that this road doesn't have is avoiding the perception of a takeover. Right? There are other methods that I can merge 2 fire districts together where it doesn't feel like a takeover of one party of the other. This is not that method. To the city's voters, this can feel like a takeover and like they've lost something, right? They've lost their city fire department. And one way to mitigate against that feeling of loss or of takeover and to turn it into a feeling of creation and collaboration is to have a new name that reflects both agencies coming together. So if that is something that both parties are open to, I would say the sooner the better. Yeah.
I take
You guys can thumb wrestle.
yeah.
Yeah, let's take a break.
Yeah,
Cool.
great, thank you.
Here, right after.
No, this is much better.
Yeah. How many words and keys saying?
So.
All right, everybody wants to have a meeting and get started.
So that concludes Emily's presentation. A couple of things, I'm the mayor and as the city manager. Gonna need to go to another board meeting. We wanted to open it up for conversation. What we'd like to do is get any of those critical topics out there while we have a full audience. And to Director Mikowski's suggestion, and I agree 100%, we probably need to create an action item moving forward as to when we're gonna reconvene, what's the next steps. I mean, obviously, these are the steps, but I think there's a number of conversations that have to occur beyond this meeting prior to full implementation of that. So we'll open up the floor to any questions that anybody has while we have the full audience.
I'd just like to, Emily, thank you for the presentation, great conversation. Just going back to the piece, and maybe you can chime in about the other districts that you've worked for and how they've done, you know, marketing, PR, timing, cost, firms that are good in the space. And I'm wondering, have others done?
Yes, so I will tell you, I don't represent, which I don't think you do either, but I could be wrong, Fort Ridge Fire Rescue.
That's John.
Yeah, and so I do know from just my work with John that he represented those agencies, but I can't speak to their process, so I just don't know. The rest of it I've seen done in different ways. As long as you're still in that voter education period.
Step one, yeah.
Step one.
Yep.
Having public meetings is really an effective way, right? Invite the public to attend and to have a conversation and to receive feedback. And now with Zoom, you can, that's more accessible than it ever was before. Mailing, like a flyer or a postcard where, and now with like, I'm not very good at technology, but like a QR code, right? You can put a QR code and then have a website where people can say, hey, again, it's 3 steps. We have a problem, we're proposing a solution, we want to hear from you. It's really important you hit all 3. Scan this QR code to learn more, right? So you can put out mailers or postcards are very cost effective, and with a QR code, you connect them right away with what you're doing. You can do an FAQ page on that website, and you can do a fillable form where people can submit their comments. You can also set up a dedicated telephone, like voicemail, where people can call in if they don't want to, you know, type on their phones. So that tends to be pretty effective from the early stages. If you were to get started now, and give yourself a year's time, you have the summer, which is a huge benefit to yourself, to you as well, because many communities have a lot of summer celebrations. You might have a Memorial Day event or a 4th of July event, or I'm from Fort Collins. I don't know what Loveland has, but Fort Collins always had New West Fest, right? I love New West Fest, right? So you have events like that in your community where you can put a table and again, ask the question, distribute the flyers, all those kinds of things.
And if I can, just, so really kind of what I put out there for the group is early on in step 1, while we don't have any really boundaries about us, right? Fair campaigns is new, we aren't on the ballot, we're new. So, you know, I think, you know, engaging my overall 30,000 foot comments are engaging a PR firm early is really, really important. And I know there's a step where you can do polling and those kinds of things, but I think, I don't know if we need that, because if this is the path we're on, this is the path we're on, right? But a PR firm early on to help us with marketing, branding, with a name, right? If we want to rename, you know, and then also what's great, if you do this early, they can put a package together, because, and I know the rule, and you guys did a great job the last time we went to November to get those passed, but then you create a package that if you pass it off to another group, right? It can't be us anymore, but if there's another third-party group that wants to do a campaign, you could actually have a package done, and then you just pass it to them, and they continue on with that, message, if you will. So anyway,
Yeah, no,
that's, from a 30,000 standpoint, that's what I'm kind of thinking about, is we engage that early, and then be able to just, over the next year, just kind of.
And having those, having those materials prepared is really important when that fair campaign practice switch does turn on. Your third-party group can be an issues committee of citizens, so we can talk about that at some point. It can also be the union stepping in to fill that role, right? So you've got a really dedicated group already that could either participate in or take the place of an issues committee.
Just piggybacking on what you're saying there in the union, Paul brought up earlier, we have a very good union. It's not a contentious relationship at all. And they've been very, very involved in our bonds, and we owe, much of our success to them, both in terms of them getting out and knocking on doors and word of mouth, and even fundraising. They stepped forward in this last election, ballpark figure, $30,000 between the state and the locals. So we need to educate them, first of all. We need their buy-in, we need to sell them, and I don't think that'll be hard, but we need to involve them right away.
Yeah, and part of, again, not as big of an issue for you all as I've seen in the past, but part of your education efforts isn't just educating the public, it's educating your employees. This is a big change for them too. And and it can be unsettling, right? They understand where they work now, they understand the system, and now the system's gonna change. And that can be tough for employees. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen made is when you don't give employees clear and transparent information, they'll make it up, right? And that's human nature. When we don't know what's going on, we try to figure it out and we make it up. We make up a story. So part of that education, even before you go to the citizens, is to start talking to your employees.
So Emily took advantage of an opportunity to toot her own horn, all too fine. Our employees are well versed in this process. I have communicated to them as recently as my most recent station visit. This is something we talk about every single time I engage.
So how much is actually going to change for the employee?
Very little.
It's not. Look down at the door on the apparatus and look down at the patch.
So if going from 3 entities to 1 is a significant cost savings, we need to know that information so that we can push that. I would recommend you reach out to Larimer County and the people that helped pass the behavioral health tax, because they did an amazing job. You got it passed after this little place. So find out what they did. Is there any way we can ask the county to contribute any mills to this, or don't go out?
Couldn't ask anything.
Okay, I'm asking, could they contribute? And would it be worth looking at, are there any areas of annexation that we're pretty close to annexing that we could bring into the city to get additional property tax?
Well, Madam Mayor, we have a couple. I know, and Linda and I actually have a conversation to have hopefully after this meeting real quick on, we've got Westerdahl, that's currently in the Rural Fire Protection District that would be in LFRA. Obviously, well, we've got the quasi judicial public hearing coming up on Sugar Creek. Sugar Creek is currently in the Rural Fire Protection District, proposed to be in the authority of the city. Those are the two big annexations I can think of. I mean, you had, I guess South Village, that was, more than 2 years ago now. That was the last big one I can think of that was likely in the rural, now in the city. But.
Any donuts we could look at?
Enclaves perhaps?
Exactly.
Yeah, not off the top of my
Not-
head. Those, I thought I mentioned at least those couple.
There are some, but not.
And then I think the other marketing thing is if there's any abilities to some of the monies, that say we have some monies we would be able to put towards sidewalks or roads or something that would be popular with people. If there's any savings, this is where that money would go, to get buy-in. I mean, it's just,
Yes.
One thing, since we're all together as a group, is, one thing I'd like to ask is, I have not seen that the authority as an entity have an audit. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, it may be good to have that data, so we have that data, what the authority's budget is and how the money is spent when we need that going forward for step one. So is it too late in the process? Is there pushback to do a financial audit
So
on the authority?
we piggyback on the city's audit.
Right, I'm talking specifically of the authority, not.
Yes, the authority. The authority piggybacks on the city's audit.
Okay.
So we are audited.
Do those books stand on their own, though? That's my point, is chief.
So we used to do separate audits and it was the same firm. All they do is just carve us out. Cheryl, am I correct on this? We would be carved out and they would basically not quite double their money. It really didn't make sense. So we are getting audited and you can identify specifically LFRA.
Right, you get my point, but chief, I mean, if we need that for our constituents to say, this is where monies are being spent, we don't have to. You know, we have the books, here they are right here.
Yes, we have audited financials, and those are actually available through the city's transparency portal. And through the city's ACFR. The audited financials are also available.
So Brian, they'll stand on their own then for the authority, okay,
The LFRA is a component unit.
okay, cool, thank you.
When Centerra, the main Centerra sunsets in 2029, what would be the additional property tax coming from that we divert now?
Just the property tax, about
So that would be a boost to,
sales tax as well.
yeah, but, yeah, the property tax would go,
That would come back to the city,
yeah.
so that would help us with our. But of course, if we forego that, then
Yeah,
it wouldn't matter.
yeah.
So that would be something. to Consider their mill levy would be collected.
Because right now it's being diverted, right? Because the property tax we get from Centerra now is diverted. So we would be getting that, where the judge's gonna, yeah, we're gonna,
Right, we still have a bill rate, right?
Yes.
And then if we forego the property
Yeah.
tax, then.
yeah, okay. I was just wondering what the amount was, about 3.5. Okay.
How much of that would end up going to the fire authority out of that 3.5 million?
Under the current model or?
Yeah.
Oh. If we were just saying, okay, how much about all of it, is the short answer. So in other words, if that 3.5 came in additional to what property tax we have now, that would approximate our current contribution to LFR. Be off a little bit there. But of course, by then, it won't. Because the LFR will cost that much more.
So I'll ask you, Brian. Brian, you had emphasized the importance of this meeting, your initial excitement when Emily had talked about going to a fire district. I guess now you've seen it, you've seen a timeline, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. Are your feelings still the same?
Absolutely, 100%. I think there's a lot of, I won't call them details, major obstacles, challenges on the way. Obviously, they're around the funding question. And what will the city forego? How can the city forego it in a thoughtful way? So that there isn't this kind of double taxation concept, which would sink this thing, right, before it left for done. So my concern is around, what are we gonna fix that number at? In other words, which LFRA funding number are we gonna use? Use the brand new one? Are we gonna include the new personnel that were hired, right, that are paid by the rural for 3 years? But that would kind of backdoor into my credit back, if you understand what I'm saying. Right, we just increased the price tag to the LFRA as a unit. And it's gonna like, hey, city, you're gonna get back half of LFRA, well, now those guys are all.
Have to figure out a fund, right?
We gotta figure it out. We gotta figure out the funding question, and I don't mind saying it, there's a lot of emotion, I've seen a lot of emotion in these groups, for the first time here, so.
Doesn't that come back to the millage being 11.1? Isn't that the figure?
Yes, if you wanted to make it tax neutral,
Yeah.
you would need the city to come up with the equivalent of 11.186 mils.
Which is, right, to 50% increase in property tax. Function of the city.
Which is very close to the amount that you already contribute to the authority.
I know.
Brian would like to stop.
I think part of the education has to be when you get your property tax bill, it's like 3,000. But the city gets a very small portion of that. I think that's part of the education, because people just assume, well, in reality, it's the school district, it's the county. The city's portion is small. So I think that's part of the education process. You don't really pay that much for all the services we provide.
But Chief, I appreciate the question, and I'm just as optimistic. And I believe in this process as much as I always have. I've always thought it's going to have some very difficult negotiations. A lot of that just comes from, as you all know, when you read the papers, the city has some very serious challenges in front of it, so it kind of compounds the conversation.
I'm not concerned about those. I appreciate the fact that we're gonna have to navigate that path. My point is making sure that you're still comfortable that this is the right path. Because I know we've had a number of conversations within this group as well as the line personnel, and I've pretty much said, for the most part, my feeling is that everybody's in alignment. I just wanted to make sure, now that you have additional details, that it's still there. We know there are bumps and bruises along the way, but that's part of it. So, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So. Do we need formal direction from boards to get this started?
So. Do I need direction? Do we need direction? Yeah, we need direction. Do we need a motion? Probably not, unless Linda wants one or Vince wants one. One way I have seen the next step be effective is to prepare what I call a skeleton sheet. I've done this enough times. I have a lot of forms. And a lot of those forms are the same. Parts of them are the same. The elections process is an elections process. It doesn't matter who you are, right? The inclusion process is the inclusion process. It doesn't matter who you are. And so what I can do is I would generate an IGA, which I would then send to Vince and Linda for review, that would have the legal pieces already filled in. And it would leave the decision points blank, right? The city contribution back would say to be discussed. The district name change would say to be discussed. But what that does is it gives everybody something tangible to look at, to read, to discuss, and to understand where these pieces fit in and how they interact with the other pieces. And so often, and it doesn't take a significant amount of time to generate that initial draft, because a lot of it, frankly, is already generated. Then we can provide that back to everybody in this group, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. That can happen any number of ways. You can put together a task force, right, with no more than 2 members from any agency. You can involve personnel. You can have multiple large group meetings like this, however is going to work best for you all to fill in those decision points. But that can be a helpful next step. Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess I do. I think from my perspective, what's important to me is to see the numbers to back up that we can do this at 11.186. That the city's comfortable with it. And that they're going to offer the voters something that's neutral, where they're gonna buy in. Otherwise, we can spend a lot of time fighting and arguing, all this other stuff's gonna be just little tiny hills in comparison to this mountain.
Maybe that's the first step then before a skeleton IGA is financially, how do we make it work?
And I would say neutral and possibly going up a couple of months. I wouldn't be afraid of them.
It's your city. And I don't say, I don't know.
The fire department.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that, the world's not gonna be voting on it.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It'll be city taxpayers voting on it, and I think anything where we're asking for money is gonna be a challenge. And of course, we gotta worry about not bankrupting the city at the same time. What's fair here? But we've always approached this from a partnership, from a community. What's fair for everybody involved? Ask anybody at this table from the world. We all live in the city. We all live in Loveland. We may not live in the city limits. People say, where are you from, Jeff? I'm from Loveland, Colorado. That's my mayor right there. It's my city councilor right there, right? I mean, that's my fire chief there. So I think if we approach it from a fairness standpoint, saying what's the right for by all voters, and we can sell it, and we're honest about it, it'll happen.
I think that's a great point, Jeff. And again, how the process plays out from here forward is up to all of the members in this room. And if the next best step is, what's the financial plan? Then let's take the financial plan and flip it into a draft pre-inclusion IGA. Let's do it that way. And I think that what's the financial plan is largely gonna be on this side of the table, right?
Yeah.
As we go down the road, I know we'll be sensitive to what's fair or equitable. There's kind of like what's fair, or what's maybe what you might call the objectively best model, or the most equitable model, and then there's gonna be subjective, in other words, to the factors that the city's experiencing in terms of revenue pressure, so. I'd like to get to exactly what's objectively, equitably perfect for the new district for LFRA, but as you know. City's got considerations in there too, so now we can work through it.
I personally like your proposal to do a skeleton IGA with, some to-dos for the organization, and whether or not you have subcommittees, whatever you want to do. But I don't want to lose the synergy we have here to get this moving. I don't want to see 2-3 months go down the road and we haven't done anything.
I mean, one of the to-dos is, what is the financial plan? And we know that today, right? So both those things can happen at the same time. We can ask our financial staff and our administrative staff to come up with a financial plan, and Vince, Linda, and I can work on a pre-inclusion IGA. Again, I don't think the initial skeleton draft pre-inclusion IGA is not a significant cost, because it's mostly drafted already. If you never get the financial plan together and this whole project falls apart, which hopefully it doesn't, it's not like you've invested a lot into something that won't happen at that point, right? If the financial plan comes together and we're ready to go, you're that much farther down the road. And I'll speak for all three attorneys in the room to say we're happy to get that going for you.
So. And when I don't want to impose on Brian's schedule, but would there be an opportunity maybe for us to inject this into the agenda, do a report out on progress moving forward? So I don't know when our next meeting is, Christine.
February 28th.
We have a meeting prior to that, and where we have some initial discussion, we can kind of report out to the board.
That was gonna be challenging.
Yeah, that would be, I couldn't get an IGA together that quickly just because I'm out of town for part of next week, but when does the rural meet? What are your meetings?
What was Matt yesterday?
Second Wednesday of every month.
Second Wednesday, and what about city council? When do you meet?
Tuesday nights, two Tuesday nights are study sessions and 2 Tuesday nights are action. So we can create special meetings if we need to.
Okay. Weekly.
Yeah,
For you.
meet weekly.
Chief, one of the things we did when we put the authority together, I think that helped, is we put together a committee. You know, we had a couple city people, a couple rural people, we had a couple firefighters on there, a couple citizens, just a smaller group that kind of kept us all on track, so that, I mean, everybody's busy in this room. Getting this group together to talk about on a regular basis, it's probably gonna be hard, but it's got a small action committee, so to speak. They can keep that ball moving forward.
I think,
Also, too, just to add to that, and this is this side of the table kind of thing, but it's also too, along with this, I think it's really important for this particular effort to come up with a budget. What's the budget for this effort? Right, what, for this specifically swim lane, right, between the city and the rural, what does the budget look like? What do we think the costs are gonna be? You know, those kind of conversation about, especially if we talk about hiring a PR firm. And then the costs that go associated with that. And so I'd really like at the same time, really kind of, it can be very rough at this point, but just kind of start thinking about, because this, you know, to your point, Jeff, you know, this effort is gonna take organizational effort, organizational treasure. You know, all those things are in this. And so I think it's really one foundational pieces to start thinking about what that looks like.
I appreciate that, Rob. What I was thinking is, what I'll characterize as the step one IGA would have a description of what those costs would be. You know, I think, for example, Emily had mentioned who's covering the cost of the election, you know, fast, slow track. I think the PR firm could potentially even be part of that, perhaps.
It's gotta be in step one.
Step one, so, I think we can really allocate and articulate what those costs are in that agreement.
What if we, you know, we were talking about increasing lodging tax, what if we dedicated that to this? We could go up on, you know, lodging tax from the current 3% to 6%, with that extra 3 being devoted to the authority.
The current lodging tax is restricted, but
Yeah, the next
contemplate the next one will not necessarily.
Yeah, people visiting here, they need protection too.
It's true.
I really like taxes.
Yeah, that's an easier tax for us to pass.
Well, that's certain that we talked about that, I guess, as a city, but we really haven't pulled hard on that string, but it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out the next step here.
I mean, I was looking at my calendar. Second Wednesday of March is coming up pretty quick, but we could try to have a pre-inclusion IGA done then. A draft one. It's gonna be rough and it's gonna have a lot of holes in it, but that's on purpose. I don't know financial staff, whether you feel like you could have a sort of financial analysis done by second Wednesday in March.
Yep.
But maybe that's our goal.
I'm sorry. So you say second Wednesday of March.
Financial analysis. Soon.
No, you guys will. Oh, is it, that's a rural meeting?
That's a rural meeting.
You
don't have those
10-day deadlines before the tax deadlines.
24 hours. I mean, another option would be to invite the rural to the LFRA meeting and the March LFRA meeting. And that way we would have more people there to hear. And it would give us a little bit more time, a little less pressure.
I think that would be a better approach. That way we're not having this here. So we catch that. So,
Hello, everybody. Attention to the chief.
yeah, I want to see how that works. So if we invited the rural board to the LFRA board, so that's the date we work off of.
Wait, the 27th.
So that gives us a little more.
Is it a one-time deal you're talking about?
Yeah, just an initial meeting. The reason I say that is I can draft the IGA before March 13th just fine, but I know you want your board packet a few days before that. And Vince and Linda need time to read it, review it, respond. It just gets to be a lot of steps in a compressed period of time. If we aimed not for March 13th, but for March 27th, which is LFRA's board meeting, then we could invite the rural to that board meeting as well as any other city officials who would like to attend and have everybody in the room on March 27th to look at that initial pre-inclusion IGA and initial financial analysis. What do we think about that?
That's a great idea, and I'd like to piggyback, maybe by that meeting, let's pick who would like to have on a committee, who wants to be on it. I mean, if you want to be on it, maybe let the chief know, let's put together some type of committee where people are gonna be getting together, forwarding the action, talking about this, coming to us and saying, this is what the committee recommends, here's the pitfalls, here's the strengths, here's the weaknesses.
And I would like to suggest that committee not have more than 2 people who are members of city council, the rural district, or the authority.
Yep.
Because it will move much more nimbly that way.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Plus, we don't run into having to post meetings.
To your question about, or a budget or, budget for this, I think that's crucial that we do that. So, I don't know if we can approximate what was done on the election that we did with the rural. I know the union's involvement, I think it was like $72,000, because they paid for half and the state, union paid for half. So, I mean, maybe we can grab some of those figures and then kind of satisfy the fact that this is where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least create a range,
Exactly.
right, at this early time, right? We don't have to get, but we kind of get an idea of what we're gonna have to think about, identifying.
Totally agree. And then Bill Ray, is it Bill May? Bill Ray, he did a great job. What it costs to use him as, I mean, there's some metrics there that we can use just to throw against the wall, see what. Okay.
One thing on the city side to consider, whether or not we want to create maybe a study session in the spring, just to get the whole council up to speed on this. And that can even be built into the marketing plan. This may be kind of the first public meeting for the city at large, knowing that the city voters will be sort of at the center of this. Just a thought.
Okay, anything else people want to bring up during the meeting? Rod?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good, thanks.
Okay, we're glad you're good. We want to keep you
Good
good.
for now, good for now.
No
Okay.
motion then? No motion.
No, I think just, heads up, we don't need to take a vote. Sounds like everybody's in agreement. We need to move forward.
We're not committed to anything at this point.
Yeah.
Right? We'll talk again in March.
Okay.
Paul, I can't really.
Your aspect, please.
Well, okay.
If we can, we're closing out. I just want to again express my appreciation on behalf of all 121 members. This is an important step for us. We appreciate the conversation and we look forward to navigating this together. So thank you.
It's a fun time.
And I'd like to commend Emily for putting together the presentation, very helpful. And having a lot of discussion with that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you, everybody. No further conversation. Who's waiting for us? And you're free to take it with you or leave it here.
There is a cost. So we're developing a budget. So,
Yeah.
you got money to make. Got money to spend.
Put the cup out there.
Yeah.
What's happening?
No, I mean, do you want me to send a full slide?
We got it. Yes.